The Arctic archipelago just north of Canada has fascinated many explorers back then, and some even attempted to sail through this so they can map the area and establish a sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. This path is called the Northwest Passage, and during the 17th century, only few were able to chart a portion of this region, since they always encountered harsh weather and had to return home. But there is one ambitious explorer who accepted to finish the mapping of the Northwest Passage, and it's this guy, John Franklin. Unfortunately for him, his expedition didn't go well. The mission was ordered by Sir John Barrow, a secretary of the British Admiralty. He wanted someone to map the rest of the sea route, and even offered substantial amount of money to select sailors to do the job. However, many of them declined because of how dangerous the region is, so without any other choice, he had to settle with John Franklin to do the mission. While Franklin may not have been as good as the others, he already had previous expeditions as a crew member, so he was quite familiar with the Arctic region and aware of the potential danger. Before they set out to the Northwest Passage, the crew made a quick stop at Stormness Harbor in the Orkney Island in northern Scotland. From there, they sailed to Greenland, where they prepared before venturing to the Arctic archipelago. They stocked up on food supplies and were fully equipped for the long sail ahead of them. The crew had two ships. One is the HMS Erebus, and the other is the HMS Terror. The HMS Erebus was commanded by John Franklin himself, while the other was commanded by Executive Officer Francis Corsair. The crew had a total of 129 men. And while this is great since they could support one another in case of any major incidents, only 6 of them, including Franklin and Corsair, had sailed through the Arctic region before. The rest were new to this type of environment. The temperature reached below freezing temperature, and combine this with the archipelago landscape, it posed a serious risk since the route became much narrow, thus a much denser concentration of ice. Nonetheless, despite the potential dangers they could face, and with inexperienced crew members they have on board, they still proceeded with the mission. They left on 1845 and sailed to the Northwest Passage. By late July, they were seen by a whaler in Baffin Bay, and that was the last reported sighting of them. After years of not hearing from the crew, in late 1848, the British Admiralty deployed 3 rescue teams, and each had its designated area to search thoroughly. They assumed that the Franklin expedition may have likely been trapped in ice and was waiting for help. The first rescue ship was assigned to search on the east of the passageway, and it was led by James Clark Ross. He sailed through the Wellington Channel, just east of Cornwallis Island, but as soon as he reached the north of Somerset Island, he had to forfeit since he experienced heavy ice. They even left a marking on the island to mark where they'd been. As you can see on the rock marking, it reads EI 1849. The initials stand for the 2 ships they used, HMS Enterprise and HMS Investigator. The second rescue expedition was assigned on the center, and it was led by John Richardson and John Ray. This time, they searched the Mackenzie and Coppermine River. John Ray was familiar with the region and had a close relationship with the indigenous people in the area. Unfortunately, they reported to John Ray that they had not seen any European boats or ship pass through the waters. And so without any leads, they sailed to the east, but ultimately, they were caught on terrible weather, and much like James Clark Ross's mission, they too had to turn back and abort the mission. The third rescue mission was assigned on the far west of the Northwest Passage. William Pullen led the expedition to sail from the Bering Strait just west of Alaska to the Mackenzie River, covering the left region of the passageway. Although he successfully sailed from start to finish, he didn't find any clues. At the end, the 3 rescue teams failed to recover any hints of Franklin's whereabouts, but the search for Franklin's expedition continued. A reward of £20,000, or about £2 million in today's money, was to be given to anyone who discovered the ship or the crew members. With such a huge sum of money, numerous people sailed throughout the Arctic region to try and find any evidence. The first clue on Franklin's expedition came in 1850 by Sir Horatio Thomas Austin. He found an abandoned camp on Beechey Island, located just east of the Wellington Channel, where James Clark Ross first searched through. Austin found a tent that was left behind, signs of firewood, and torn clothing scattered on the ground. But there was one strange thing he discovered, and that was a gravestone of 3 men which were named John Torrington, William Brain, and John Hartnell. Apart from the other 3, no other bodies were found on the island. There was no sign of Franklin's ship nearby, and the camp may likely had been a stopover for them. The 3 men probably had died on the ship, and the crew set up a camp on the nearest land they could find to give them a proper burial before continuing on their journey. Even though Austin didn't find any signs of Franklin's ship, at least he knew they passed through this water. Austin continued to sail, but ended up turning back because of the icy water. Another big clue on this mystery was found in 1854. John Ray, who was one of the men on the first 3 rescue missions, sailed through the Arctic archipelago to map the area as well as looking for Franklin's expedition. Near the Repulse Bay, he encountered indigenous families who were selling relics. It caught his attention when he saw silver utensils and a silver plate on the back engraved Sir John Franklin KCH. He talked to one of the indigenous people on how he got those items. He told John Ray that 4 years ago, in 1850, they saw at least 40 men dragging a boat. Then the following spring, when the indigenous people returned to the area, all 40 of the men had starved to death. This information alone convinced John Ray what exactly happened to the expedition. However, he didn't investigate the rest place of the 40 men who had died and believed the indigenous people about the story. But before he went back to England, he brought the silver plate to show as proof. After he reported about his discovery to the British Admiralty, they officially labeled the crew deceased in service and would no longer deploy any rescue team. Franklin's wife was not pleased with the result, since they didn't bring any solid evidence that the crew was actually dead. She tried to convince the British Admiralty to continue to search for her husband, but they refused. So she took the matter into her own hands and personally financed the search expedition with her own money and appointed Francis McClintock to head the whole operation. It took a couple more years until Francis received a major tip on Franklin's expedition. In 1859, some Inuit people told him that a ship had been destroyed by ice near the King William Island. They further stated that the men set up a camp but ended up starving to death. This time, unlike John Ray, who didn't investigate when he received a hint from the indigenous people, Francis followed through and went to the King William Island to thoroughly search the island. Francis and his lieutenant William Hobson separated to 2 groups to scour the area. Ultimately, they found a small lifeboat which contained 2 bodies, and near it, they found this, a note buried under a rock. The note was much like form given by the British Admiralty to the cruise ship in case of emergency. As you can see, the note is quite messy and hard to read, but it contains significant details about Franklin's expedition. The first line reads, 28th of May, 1847, HM ships Erebus and Terror wintered in the ice in latitude 70 degrees 5 minutes north, longitude 98 degrees 23 minutes west. Having wintered in 1846 at Beechey Island, in latitude 74 degrees 43 minutes and 28 seconds north, after having ascended Wellington Channel to latitude 77 degrees and returned by the west side of Cornwallis Island. Sir John Franklin commanding the expedition. All well. At the bottom, party consisting of 2 officers and 6 men left the ships on Monday, 24th May, 1847. Signed, G.M. Gore, Lieutenant. Signed, Chas F. Duvois, Mate. By the looks of it, this portion was written before the tragic event happened, but as you can see, there's more writing on the sides that explained more in detail as to what happened to them. If you rotate it, on the side it reads, Sir John Franklin died on the 11th of June, 1847, and the total loss by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. This note provided important information as to what happened to the expedition. It still, however, doesn't tell the full story as to what happened to the rest of the crew members. Apart from this note, not much significant discovery was found throughout the years. But in 2014, with a much advanced technology, a search team deployed by the Canadian government located Erebus's ship at the West O'Reilly Island. Then 2 years later in 2016, the Arctic Research Foundation located HMS Terror ship just south of the King William Island in Terror Bay. Since both ships are impossible to bring ashore, scientists relied on remote devices to collect photos as well as examine the overall ships. While it was great that the two ships were uncovered, there is little to no answer the whereabouts of Franklin and his crew members.